What happens when one of Britain's most respected actresses walks into what should be a simple chat show interview, only to find herself face to face with a host who thinks he can say anything he wants? It only took 37 seconds of inappropriate commentary for Jonathan Ross to discover that Helen Mirren refuses to be anyone's punching bag, leading to one of the most shocking walkouts in television history. The studio lights were blazing hot that evening as Helen Mirren settled into the guest chair opposite Jonathan Ross. She had come to promote her latest film, expecting the usual lightweight banter that filled these late-night slots. What she got instead was something far more sinister. Ross leaned back in his chair with that trademark smirk spreading across his face. The audience was still clapping from her entrance when he decided to launch his first attack. Helen, Ross began, his voice dripping with false charm. You know, I have to say, for someone your age, you still look absolutely fantastic. The compliment seemed innocent enough, but Mirren's eyes narrowed slightly. She had been in this business long enough to recognize a setup when she heard one. Thank you, Jonathan, she replied carefully, her voice steady and professional. Ross wasn't finished. No, seriously, I mean it. Most women your age would have given up trying to look glamorous years ago, but here you are, still fighting the good fight against Father Time. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the warm, welcoming tone they expected from their beloved chat show host. Mirren's posture straightened, and her hands clasped together in her lap. I'm not fighting anything, Jonathan, she said, her voice taking on a cooler edge. I'm simply living my life. Ross chuckled, clearly pleased with himself. Oh, come on, Helen. We all know the tricks actresses use. The lighting, the makeup, the camera angles. It's all smoke and mirrors, isn't it? I think you're confusing me with someone who seeks your approval. Mirren shot back, her famous composure beginning to crack just slightly. The host pressed on, oblivious to the warning signs. But that's what I find so fascinating about older actresses. You all pretend you're comfortable with aging, but then you spend fortunes trying to look 20 years younger. I beg your pardon? Mirren's voice cut through the studio like ice. Ross was in his element now, feeding off what he mistook for playful banter. Well, it's obvious, isn't it? The work you've had done, very subtle, very tasteful, but we can all see it. The audience fell completely silent. This had crossed a line that everyone in the room recognized, except for the man behind the desk. What exactly are you suggesting, Jonathan? Mirren asked, her voice deadly quiet. I'm not suggesting anything, Ross replied with a laugh. I'm stating the obvious. You've clearly had some work done. There's no shame in it. Most women in Hollywood do. Mirren's eyes flashed dangerously. First of all, I'm not most women. Second of all, your assumptions are both incorrect and deeply offensive. Ross waved his hand dismissively. Oh, come off it, Helen. We're all adults here. There's no need to pretend. Pretend? Mirren's voice rose slightly. The only person pretending here is you, pretending that your behavior is acceptable. The host's confident smile faltered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered. I'm just being honest. Isn't that what good television is about? Honesty? No, Jonathan, Mirren said, her voice gaining strength. Good television is about respect, something you clearly know nothing about. Ross leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with what he thought was wit. But Helen, surely you must admit that staying relevant in your industry requires certain sacrifices, certain enhancements. The only sacrifice I see here, Mirren replied sharply, is your sacrifice of basic human decency. The tension in the studio was palpable now. Camera operators glanced nervously at each other, and the audience sat in stunned silence. Ross chuckled again, but it sounded forced this time. You're being awfully sensitive about this, Helen. I thought someone with your experience would have thicker skin. My skin is perfectly fine, thank you, Mirren said coldly. It's your manners that seem to be missing. Oh, lighten up, Ross said, his voice taking on a petulant tone. Can't you take a joke? A joke? Mirren's eyebrows shot up. Is that what you call systematically insulting your guests? How amusing. The host was starting to look flustered, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. Look, Helen, I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. No, Jonathan, Mirren said, her voice like steel. You're saying what you're thinking, and frankly, it says far more about you than it does about me. Ross's face was reddening now, whether from embarrassment or anger, it was hard to tell. I think you're overreacting just a bit here, and I think you're underestimating just how inappropriate your behavior has been. Mirren fired back without hesitation. The studio atmosphere had shifted from casual entertainment to something resembling a courtroom drama. Ross, clearly rattled by Mirren's refusal to play along with his game, decided to double down on his attack. You know what your problem is, Helen? Ross said, his voice losing all pretense of charm. You take yourself far too seriously. Mirren's laugh was sharp and humorless. And you don't take yourself seriously enough. Or perhaps you do, which makes this even more disturbing. I'm just trying to have a conversation here, Ross protested, his hands gesturing wildly. But you're acting like I've committed some terrible crime, haven't you? Mirren asked pointedly. You've spent the last several minutes making personal attacks disguised as observations. If that's your idea of conversation, I'd hate to see what you consider an argument. Ross leaned back in his chair, trying to regain his composure. Look, Helen, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Let's talk about your new film instead. Oh, now you want to talk about my work? Mirren's voice dripped with sarcasm. How refreshing. Though I suspect you'll find a way to make that insulting too. Don't be ridiculous, Ross said, his irritation showing clearly now. I'm a professional. I can separate the person from their work. Really? Mirren tilted her head slightly. Because so far, you've shown no ability to separate your own ego from basic human courtesy. Ross's jaw tightened. You know what? Fine. Let's talk about your film. Though I have to wonder if audiences will connect with a romantic drama starring someone of your vintage. The audience audibly gasped. Several people in the front row looked genuinely shocked at the host's continued offensive behavior. Mirren sat perfectly still for a moment, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was dangerously calm. My vintage? Well, yes, Ross said, apparently oblivious to the hole he was digging himself into. I mean, let's be realistic here. Romance films typically feature younger actresses. Audiences expect a certain level of believability. Believability? Mirren repeated, her voice rising slightly. Are you suggesting that women over a certain age are incapable of experiencing romance? Ross shrugged carelessly. I'm suggesting that Hollywood knows its market, and the market wants youth and beauty. And you consider yourself an expert on both? Mirren asked, her tone cutting. I know what sells, Ross replied smugly. And frankly, Helen, stories about older women trying to recapture their youth are more tragic than romantic. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the camera crew seemed frozen in place, unsure whether to keep filming or stop the carnage. Mirren's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. Trying to recapture my youth? Come on, Helen, Ross said, his confidence apparently restored by her quiet response. We both know that's what these roles are about. Older actresses desperately clinging to relevance. Desperately clinging, Mirren repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. Ross nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. It's actually quite sad when you think about it. All these mature actresses taking roles that would be better suited to someone younger and more vibrant. More vibrant, Mirren said, her voice still eerily calm. Well, yes, Ross continued, completely misreading her mood. Someone with more energy, more appeal. Someone audiences actually want to watch in romantic scenes. Mirren stood up slowly from her chair. The movement was so sudden and unexpected that Ross actually jumped slightly. I think, Mirren said, her voice carrying across the silent studio, that this interview is over. Ross blinked in confusion. What? Helen, sit down. We're in the middle of filming. We were in the middle of filming, Mirren corrected, her dignity intact despite the host's attempts to destroy it. Now we're finished. You can't just leave, Ross sputtered. This is my show. Yes, Mirren replied coolly. It certainly is. And that says everything anyone needs to know about you. Ross's face was turning red now, his professional facade completely cracking. Helen, don't be childish about this. I was just being honest. No, Jonathan, Mirren said, her voice carrying the authority of decades in the entertainment industry. You were being cruel. There's a difference. Though I suspect you're incapable of recognizing it. Cruel? Ross laughed, but it sounded hollow and forced. That's a bit dramatic, don't you think? The only thing dramatic here, Mirren replied, is your complete lack of professionalism and basic human decency. Ross stood up from behind his desk, clearly flustered and angry. Now, wait just a minute. I've been nothing but honest with you. Honest? Mirren's eyebrows rose again. Is that what you call systematic attempts to humiliate your guests? How enlightening. I wasn't trying to humiliate anyone, Ross protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Then you're even more pathetic than I thought, Mirren said sharply. Because if this wasn't intentional, it means you're naturally this offensive. The host's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. You're completely overreacting to this whole situation. Mirren turned to face Ross fully. her posture radiating the kind of quiet power that only comes from years of commanding respect on stages and film sets around the world. "Overreacting?" she said, her voice cutting through the studio like a blade. "Jonathan, you've spent the entire interview making personal attacks, questioning my appearance, my age, my relevance, and my right to work in my chosen profession. If anything, I've been remarkably restrained." Ross threw his hands up in exasperation. "Oh, come on, Helen. This is television. This is what we do. We have fun. We joke around. We keep things light." "Light?" Mirren's voice rose with incredulity. "You call systematic degradation light? You call professional humiliation fun? I call it entertainment." Ross shot back, his mask of civility finally slipping completely. "Something you clearly don't understand anymore." The audience was dead silent now, some people covering their mouths in shock at their beloved host's behavior. The camera operators continued filming, though several looked deeply uncomfortable. Mirren smiled, but it was a smile that could freeze fire. "Entertainment? How interesting. And tell me, Jonathan, who exactly is being entertained by your behavior tonight?" Ross gestured wildly toward the audience. "Everyone here came to be entertained. They want to see real conversation, not some sanitized, boring interview." "Real conversation," Mirren repeated thoughtfully. "Is that what you think this is? Because from where I'm standing, it looks more like a sad man desperately trying to feel important by tearing down someone more accomplished than himself." Ross's face went white, then red. "More accomplished? Are you serious? This is my show. These are my studios. You're just a guest here." "A guest," Mirren said softly, "who you've treated with all the courtesy of a prison warden, though I suspect most prison wardens have better manners." "How dare you?" Ross sputtered, his composure completely gone now. "I've been nothing but accommodating to you." Mirren laughed, and the sound was like ice cracking. "Accommodating? Is that what you call suggesting I've had plastic surgery? Questioning my right to play romantic roles? Implying that audiences don't want to see women my age on screen?" "I was just being realistic," Ross protested weakly. "You were being a bully," Mirren replied without hesitation. "A small, petty bully who thinks his position gives him the right to abuse people." Ross stepped out from behind his desk, his hands shaking slightly with rage. "Abuse? That's completely ridiculous. I haven't abused anyone, haven't you?" Mirren asked calmly. "Then what would you call it? Because I can assure you, Jonathan, that if someone treated your mother, your sister, or your daughter the way you've treated me tonight, you wouldn't call it entertainment." The host's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For the first time all evening, he seemed genuinely speechless. Mirren continued, her voice gaining strength. "You see, that's the problem with people like you. You think respect is something you can choose to give or withhold based on your mood. But respect isn't a gift, Jonathan. It's a basic requirement of human interaction." "This is my show," Ross repeated, but his voice was smaller now, desperate. "Yes, it is," Mirren agreed. "And everyone watching will remember that. They'll remember how you chose to use your platform. They'll remember what kind of man you revealed yourself to be when you thought you had all the power." Ross made one last attempt to regain control. "Helen, please, just sit back down. Let's finish this professionally." Mirren gathered her purse from beside the chair, her movements deliberate and dignified. "Professionally? Now you want to be professional? After spending the entire interview acting like a playground bully with a television show?" "I was just trying to make good television," Ross said, his voice barely above a whisper now. "No, Jonathan," Mirren replied, her voice carrying across the silent studio. "Good television requires respect for your guests, intelligence in your questions, and humanity in your interactions. You've demonstrated none of those qualities tonight." She turned toward the studio exit, then paused and looked back at Ross one final time. "You know what the saddest part of this is? You actually had the opportunity to interview one of Britain's most respected actresses. You could have talked about my career, my craft, my experiences working with some of the greatest directors of our time. Instead, you chose to focus on my appearance and my age, as if those were the only things about me worth discussing." Ross stood frozen behind his desk, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "That choice," Mirren continued, "says nothing about me and everything about you. And everyone in this studio tonight will remember that." She walked toward the exit, with her head held high, every inch the consummate professional, despite the host's attempts to diminish her. "Helen, wait," Ross called out desperately. "We can start over. We can do this differently." Mirren stopped at the studio door and turned back one final time. "No, Jonathan, we can't. Because this wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was you showing us exactly who you are when you think you have power over someone. And I have no interest in giving you a second chance to demonstrate your character." With that, Helen Mirren walked out of the studio, leaving behind a host whose show would never quite recover from the moment he learned that true class cannot be intimidated, diminished, or destroyed by small-minded cruelty.